my fault and my failure to calculate how complicated and involved kids travel hockey is going to be. This is a bad choice. But all's well now. Looks like Will is not here this time. It's my fault. I was supposed to link up with him this week probably. But in the meantime, since we've got a smaller group today, I will turn it over to the group for where we want to go, either based on where we were previously or new stuff. So with that, open to the floor, and if not, I'll open up on a couple other topics here in the meantime. I also set a 60-second clock because there's a period of, I'll graph it while you guys decide what you want to talk about.
When you say 60 seconds, what is a second? You define that?
A second, in this case, is an arbitrarily defined number of changes, but that number of changes is expressed in the modern time in oscillations in a particular external field of the cesium-123 atom.
I'm pretty sure mine uses coherence.
Yes, but it's slightly, but the difference between timekeeping and time metric setting is explained by this. This is perceived awkwardness as perceived over time. And at 60 seconds, we reach a local minimum where people feel comfortable talking again. This is people's awkwardness of like, okay, it's up to anybody. Everybody's like, is it me? Am I supposed to be the guy? Do I say something? Do I not? Should I be deferential to other people?
So we're in that little trough right before
it starts to go down, I feel like, because then you think you'll start talking, and then either somebody else says something or two people say something together, and it rockets back up for a minute, and eventually over time it goes back down.
But if you're a social extrovert, you just don't care.
So yours goes like this, which is awesome. Yes, if you've got one of those, then go. It's all on you.
I have no preference what topic we do.
Okay. Well, I will probably. One of the things that I'm. All right, so we're doing the videos that we have planned on doing. I've got a setup in the basement now. I've started drawing, and I've got 2 of the scripts written, and they're not perfect, but we'll give it the first shot, and who cares? What I've been thinking is the right way to approach it. So I'll do a quick overview of what I think that we want to do, and then I'll talk to specifics that I'm into now, but then I want to jump to the theological ones fairly quickly, because I've basically got, these are videos that are intended to be in 2 sets. One of them are, let's say, spiritual or theological or Christian philosophical, where, a lot of the interest in this class is centered around this kind of thing. Over here are ones that are mathematical, engineering, physics, and philosophy of all of the above, of these up here. And these tend to interact more with the popular culture that's already out there. And that the kind of the long-term goal, as I was at least conceiving of it here, was, given that there's some, audience of X million people that look at this kind of stuff, if this was the repository of solid ground videos out there, and you can bring people to, I'm explaining stuff you guys are already getting to, you can use these to bring people to this video that links to this video, and that eventually links over here. Eventually you also find this other stuff, and I'm sure a lot of people will filter out as a result, but it's also an opportunity to get people who are interested in good, hard intellectual process, especially intellectual processes that evaluate the fundamentals and foundational aspects of your thinking. That it's not that these people don't have philosophical musings of their own. And I will admit that if I learned anything from that brief, poster thing in MIT, it was, I thought all these engineering guys were going to have absolutely no interest at all in this, what's clearly philosophical nonsense. And it was wildly, comparatively popular, which just goes to show everybody cares about this stuff at some level. And so it seems like a good opportunity. So that being said, we have to introduce the new. This is not the first time, is it? Is this the first time?
No.
Okay, I've just been missing time. It's just another charming time. Okay. So the first two that I'm working on, and I don't know how I ended up here, were a time one that we discussed in here a little bit, and times versus change, and the other one was a fundamentals of math one. But I am finding that to write the fundamentals of math one, that embedded in it are 4 or 5 other ones that I just don't think you can make the point without it. My wife has told me that I'm ignorant and need to do it this particular way, and so I'm going to do it her way because she's right. But I'll talk a little bit about where we're sitting on this, and then over here, can you guys tell me, without prompting, what you think are the videos that we would make? I've already got a list. I've already got some of it drawn up. But what do you think are the videos that we ought to be doing on the spiritual side, the Christian philosophical or theological side, that you would think would be of the most value out there, either because they're novel or they're kind of a new view on it, whatever?
What are you trying to do? I missed this beginning of the conversation, I guess.
If there's a strategic point to all of this, it's, I'd say I have 2 major concerns, and they're the exact same ones. That's the reason that I'm involved in Solid Ground at all. And the first is, in my opinion, the Christianity is at base the truth. It is the truth about the universe. There are thousands of versions of Christianity, and so there are 1,000 wrong variations on it. But at the end of the day, the fundamental philosophical truth of the universe is best found, most completely found in the story of Christianity, in Jesus, who Jesus is, in the existence of God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That is the base of truth. And so if part of our, depending on where you're reading Paul, you can say that there are 2 purposes to our life right now, at least according to a couple places Paul references it. One is our sanctification, and the other one is gaining the knowledge of God. So sanctification, the more you understand God's holiness, maybe the more you understand about what sanctification would look like and what your goal is. So in short, if I really do desire all the world to come to Christ, for many people, and when I say many, I mean at 1% of the population, but for many people, 1 to 5% of the population maybe, they have intellectual obstacles that are often not answered in a church. So if you see yourself as an intellectual and you walk into a church, it's very, very easy to say, these people are believing things on blind faith. They can't answer some fundamental questions when I ask them, etc. This class was intended to be from day one, we'll take your question all the way down to the point where, to use even some of our most recent guests, we got down to the laws of logic and found that we didn't initially have agreement on what the laws of logic were. So the willingness to go that deep is one thing that I'm interested in, so that nobody can say Christianity is an intellectually vacuous exercise, but rather, it turns out the deeper you dig, the more you're like, wow, this Christianity stuff seems to be not only right, but all the intuitions I have and all the basic assumptions that I make about the universe all keep with Christianity, whereas my own worldview quickly unravels when I start examining it down to the base levels. That's one thing that I'm interested in Solid Ground.
So could you sum it up and say that the essential truths expressed in Christianity are true?
Yes. So tautology, yes, but not only that. That I think that there are both better ways to articulate the truths of Christianity than we typically do from the pulpit or the Sunday school lectern. And I think that the more we can promulgate that, the better. The second, and the reason I was excited about Bill Craig doing his systematic theology is, I probably couldn't find it here, but you'll remember that we had like a drawing of a bunch of tiles or plates that were our theology, and all of those plates should fit together. You can't have contradictions within your theology. So I'm moving towards a systematic theology where everybody recognizes, if you say this about God over here, it is also true about God over there in your theology. So that the theology needs to be complete and non-self-contradictory, because one of the things I think that is a problem for Christianity are not non-true doctrines that are taught and promulgated, and people who see the contradiction are going to have a problem with it, and rightly so. And so I think cleaning up our own belief system is one thing that we ought to be doing. Learning how deep our belief system goes, which is all the way to the bottom, and being able to articulate that is some of the stuff that we want to be able to do out of here. And then I don't think that the Spirit of God is done working when it comes to giving knowledge to people who seek it. I think the ask, seek, and knock continues today. And in my mind, at least a couple of things that we've worked on solid ground here are things that have either fairly novel answers to them, or at least novel takes on those answers that help us understand it in the modern scientific world more than we otherwise would have.
So your real goal is to impart knowledge?
Yes. Impart knowledge, inspire people to dig deeper all the way to the base. And in imparting knowledge, a key part of that is cleaning up our own knowledge.
Okay, but you're not evangelizing.
I think you do that by doing so. So let's imagine, pretend for a second that you are the evangelist to the scientific and engineering community. What's the best way in? Now, if it turns out that all of these scientists and engineers, or 90% of them, what do they do in their off time is not go to wild parties, but instead maybe they comb YouTube and look for other stuff that's interesting to them. And you look at, if there's anything that's amazing, it's that 3 blue, 1 brown, a YouTube channel dedicated, as far as I can tell, solely to mathematical education, high-level mathematical education, has tens or hundreds of millions of views. And the stuff that this guy covered this is not easy and basic stuff. And people are absolutely all over it. So, in short, I think that there are that same audience who are the same audience that will see themselves as intellectually rigorous, need to know that Christianity is as intellectually rigorous or more than their own disciplines are. I would love to show that. So that, in short, I would like to, here it is in a sentence for you, I would like to retake the intellectual high ground. And I mean that in the military sense, I also mean it in the Obi-Wan Kenobi sense.
I think a lot of intellectual types prefer to have their base instincts be assumed wrong, because it's like, the simple people think that the universe can't be infinite or something, but it's just beyond our understanding. And I'm more advanced if I think the universe is unknowable.
Yeah.
So.
But by the same token, they'll turn around and tell you stuff like they know what the current limits of the observable universe are. So you can interact with them on whatever they think their own grounds are. So I agree with you.
To the question of videos on the theological side,
Yes.
that we could be putting out, I think of 4 of them that come to the top of my mind.
Okay.
The first one is common pain.
Yep.
I think every theologian that I've ever read has answered or addressed the problem of pain.
Yep.
But the response that you give with regards to a 2-part kind
Yep.
of world system, that's at least unique. I don't hear a lot of other theologians talking about that, and I think that it is true. So
Okay.
that would be a good.
That's number 1 on my list. So yeah, I'll tell you that you know how you develop an argument and over time you've got it down and you're like, no problem, I can answer it. Here it is, 1, 2, 3.
Oh, yeah.
This one, I'm not happy with where it sits yet. So we'll probably any contribution you guys want to make to that one to helping re-articulate it, you guys understand the point of it. If there's a better way to say it than I'm saying it, I'm looking for a better way to say it because I'm not entirely happy with the way we're saying it.
So that's 1. 2, I think, is the nature of the Trinity.
Okay.
I think you have a unique perspective on that.
Yep.
3, I think, is just a general video on objective truth and morality.
Okay.
And how those two kind of miss up. Basically, just a different analysis of the moral argument.
Okay.
And 4,
Yeah, sorry. I'll asterisk that because I got a question for you.
yeah. I was hoping you wouldn't have a question there because I have a lot of the
Well, it's an opinion question. So.
Yeah. 4th, I think for me, one of the most compelling things in my years at this class has been those days where a few years back, we took a slow, slugging crawl through all of those arguments, the objective, the ontological argument, the moral argument, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument. We looked at all of those, and then we kind of looked at base logic in math and science.
Yep.
And then we looked at like the most important thing in the universe, which is love, and we kind of walked that definition. And then you said that if you care about science and math and philosophy, you look at the best answers in each of those, it all points to this one thing.
Right.
So this really good encapsulation or synthesis of science and theology, science and
Okay.
God. I don't even want to say theology because it's just science and truth, which science should be about truth, but obviously everyone's blind.
Okay. Yeah, I had not even considered that one, and that's a really good idea. Okay. Can do. My question for you on 3 was, so I think that Sam Harris is a little bit out of the. He's still relevant in discourse, spheres of discourse out there. What I haven't heard a lot of people batting his ideas around, except for I do hear language from the moral landscape showing up in different podcasts. So I think we've got so Bill Craig has a knockdown argument against it, but most people don't get that because you have to logic first for it. I think there's another one that we have articulated in this class that I like. Are you saying, would you use that one where that was if you take Sam Harris's moral landscape argument seriously and you run it, it shows that things like genocide and suicide would be obligatory in certain situations, and that the only way to know whether you are obligated to kill yourself and everybody around you is what the future looks like. Either another new human race spawns off to the side, or aliens show up, or something like that, and that ultimately you point out that only somebody who knows all the future of the universe could then tell you what the objective morality would actually be, which then means that only God, even theoretically, can answer that question.
I almost want to break it up because I think that that's a good answer to that specific question.
But it's too specific to that.
It's too specific, and I think that in my own experience, I have friends who get wrapped around the axle all the time and just trying to explain why you need why objective truth has to exist and why objective morals exist.
Okay.
So maybe just another explanation of that.
Okay.
So a more generic explanation on the topic of objectivity. And then I would find that personally helpful. I'm not sure that what we've talked about in this class is revolutionarily bringing new information on that.
Okay. Well, I'll think about that and see if there's a fresh spin we can take on it. Okay. What else? Thank you, Michael.
If I look at your 3 main, your spiritual, your theological, and your, I guess, philosophical, is that what that is?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What are you basing your source of truth on in each of those subjects?
So in terms of what epistemology are we using?
I won't say facts, but for example, spiritual, you're trying to take it from no God, we're just nothing but a bunch of molecules, to acceptance of the knowledge of a creator.
Yes.
So that's spiritual.
Yes.
Then you can take it to a next level, theological, so you're talking about what's the basis of your next level? Natural revelation covers spiritual, but you're not going into natural revelation. You're going into a logical approach to spirituality, I guess.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. So I think there are two ways to approach current.
And then when you start getting into higher theological and more Christianity, then you have to have some method of special revelation.
Yeah, I think there are 2 ways.
You're not going to prove that logically.
2 ways to interact with somebody who, let's assume everybody out there already holds beliefs, period. Because generally speaking, that's the case. people already have an opinion. They may not be able to articulate their opinion, but if you basically were like, gun to your head, do you believe God exists or not? They've got an answer to that question. Gun to your head, do you think Christianity is true? They got an answer to that question. Gun to your head, do you think there's a life after death? They've got an answer to that question. So there are two ways of doing it. The hard slog that nobody's prepared for, because we just don't do it. We don't teach it in the educational system. We don't do it practically anywhere else, is the ground up approach where you say, okay, for the sake of us actually discovering truth, let's burn all of our current beliefs to the ground and start over from zero. And if you can't justify it, it doesn't go in the stack, which is the long, painful walk that Michael was talking about, was us doing that. And basically be like, we'll start at cogito ergo sum or something like that, and then walk our way forward and see where we get. So the ground up approach is long. It requires a willingness to destroy your own belief system, at least temporarily suspend intellectually, which is, I think, is extraordinarily hard for human beings to do. It requires a knowledge of logic or a willingness to learn it for a while. And so you can see as I think, maybe there are 4 or 5 other things that you kind of need in order to do the ground up approach. There's a problem with it, is that most people will drop out. It's a marathon, and people ain't ready for marathons.
And you have to accept it too.
Yeah, right.
Some people will say, well, yeah, that makes sense, but I still don't buy it.
Right, in which case you're like, we agreed, you're not allowed to do that, right? So the other is the current state model, where you examine, you say, I'm not going to tell you what to believe. You tell me what you believe, and I'm going to ask you questions about it. Well, I believe that, what do you believe about the universe? What do you believe about the beginning of the universe? What do you believe about how things come to exist? What do you believe about causality? What do you believe? And as you tick through them, you can show that there's contradiction after contradiction after contradiction after contradiction, to the point where either they say, well, I guess we should just never be certain of anything, or they are willing to start engaging on each one of those and drill them down a little bit. So you use their own discovered contradictions to lead you to the will to continue to examine it down to a level where you can satisfy those contradictions. Now, the advantage to this one is you can do it much narrower focus, and you don't, as a result, you don't have to go quite as deep sometimes. It's a deep, but pencil-sized penetration, rather than this one right here, which is like excavating the entirety of your knowledge. So it's less work. It can be done faster, but it's less complete in its step. You just figure out that, what I believed about science, some of the basics of science turns out not to be true. Well, now what? Like, well, let's talk about math. And they're like, oh. So there's the problem is, both of them in the long run, if you want to get to a complete view of truth, require a significant amount of work. I mean, if you just consider how long it's taken us in solid ground to do the things that we do, and you add it up over time, not just the time that we've spent in this class, but the time you've spent thinking about it and watching videos and listening to podcasts and talking to other people, if you add all that up together, you're at thousands of hours probably. So, but in order to do that, you have to inspire people to want to do that. And if you're going to inspire people to want to do that, you have to give them motivation to do so, which is what this is. This right here is, these right here are about this. And some of these right here are maybe a split between the two of them, but they're pointed towards wanting to say, well, let's examine the kinds of things that we need in order to do the ground up approach. But like the Trinity thing, that goes back to current state, usually for Christians. It's not really it's intended to be an argument for atheists to say that the Trinity exists necessarily. But the number of people who are ready for that argument are 1/1000th of a percent.
Each one of those 4 points points to one of your 3 approach. I would guess objective truth and reality would point to spirituality.
Yeah.
Trinity would point to your theology.
Well, here's why you could current state that way.
And those are problems that people will bring up when you start addressing spirituality.
So I didn't explain it well. As an example, one of the current state beliefs might be, well, I think that there is no objective truth. And that's where you can attack it and be like, oh, okay, so Nazis could have been, if the Nazis have won, killing Jews is right. And they're like, whoa, no. And then you work down and you show that the statement that they just made, if you back it up, unpack it, and lay it all out, means that if the Nazis won World War II, killing Jews becomes morally obligatory, not morally awful. So that kind of, here's an expression, here's a current state belief that people have about objective morality. You attack that one belief, and then that should lead them, if you think that your own moral system is something, and then somebody in a 5-minute conversation shows you that means that you think that the Nazis could have been right, then what you ought to do is walk away from that conversation and say something like, I probably need to reassess my own basis for morality, right? Me and the Nazis agree on something about killing Jews. Surely something went wrong there. And if they don't have that reaction, which, by the way, I think a majority of people won't. They'll say like, well, that was weird. Maybe I got to think about that. And that's it. They'll leave it. They don't recognize that whatever their beliefs are about morality are, in fact, infecting their entire life. And you almost want to wind the clock back to I've heard, I know Jordan Peterson is a controversial fellow in a number of circles, but he had a lecture that I saw a clip from somewhere where he talks about everybody saying, where he says something like, if you had been a citizen in Germany in 1939, you'd have been a Nazi too, or you would have most likely gone along with a lot of what was going along. And people revolt against that, but then he makes the case for we just go along oftentimes with what the culture is doing. And if you're not actively fighting against it, and by the way, at that time they were executing people that were actively fighting against it in some cases, you may find yourself participating in something that later people come to say, wow, that was terrible. How did we ever get there? Okay. Sorry, too much tirade on a simple question. But yeah, I think to your point, yes, more on the ground up, but you inspire hopefully the desire to look at it by doing smaller, discrete current state versions of that.
I have a few, but other Christians would probably object with your view of hell and call you a heretic.
Yeah.
So is that, or you want to?
Well, I guess there's two things to do about that. One, either make the case for it, or two, don't mention it. So if it's going to offend people,
You got to draw the line somewhere.
Well, I mean, like, none of the things that we're talking about it involve the doctrine, my understanding of the doctrine, right? So, and if anybody's wondering what he's talking about, I don't at this point don't think I believe in eternal conscious torment. I tend to believe that these souls are destroyed by God, that they're thrown into the everlasting fire to be destroyed, not to be tortured forever.
Well, I mean, atheists bring that up with the problem of pain.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, some people just think they're in pain forever, so what's the point?
Yeah, and so you either have to have a variant answer for that under the psychological problem of pain deal, which, by the way, are plenty of people out there make those arguments, including Bill Craig. But yeah.
Is that a hell on earth?
No, Bill basically suggests, I think, if I've got his view, if I remember his view correctly, I've heard it, but it's been a while since I've thought about it. I think that he thinks that many Christians will say, well, your offense is against an infinitely good God, and therefore it rates an infinite amount of punishment. So they'll say something like that. Other people will say something like, the people in hell continue to want to be in hell. Or we'll say, will continue to offend. So they don't end up in hell saying, well, wow, sorry, God was right. Man, I'm really sorry about this. Please forgive me. They continue to be angry about it and resentful about it and hateful about it, and they are rebelling against God continuously, in which case Bill's like, and their punishment continues continuously, exactly appropriately. I think that's what his approach is. But, so what are you saying?
Well, you're just saying, if you bring that up, you'll get pushback.
Yes. I think we'll get pushback in a number of these, but
right.
The idea is to start the dialogue. Yes.
Well, I guess a few concepts that I think are really valuable that a lot of people aren't aware of. Like, what's the difference between between contingent and necessary. People don't really know what those words mean, but they kind of open up a lot. And I guess that brings in the idea of possible worlds.
Yep. So, as you know, in some of these, we use possible world semantics to talk about them. In the long marathon slide we did, contingency and necessity turned out to be the real spot that you started on all this stuff. So, yes, I'm trying to think. I would have normally said, I can't figure out how to get that into a short format video. So, we'll have to skip that and do it some other time. But I've been completely shown to be a bad prophet by the fact that these hour-long plus long format videos are not only on YouTube, they're apparently getting watched in droves. So, man, they do. And what I'm unclear on is are people consuming that at similar rates, or maybe even similar fractions of rates compared to these short format videos?
A lot of times they make an hour-long one and they do clip highlights.
Yeah.
They're like 5 minutes.
So that I get. My question is anybody watching are people just watching the clips out of it?
When they watch the clip and they go, I want to see the whole thing.
Okay. And the rate at which that's occurring, I'm very interested in that, and I don't know that.
I'm just looking for my notes here, so I'm
Yes, sir.
pulling more ideas out. One thing, if you really don't mind being called a heretic, if you do, maybe we don't want to talk about it.
I don't mind being called a heretic. I mind being a heretic.
Sure, that makes sense, yeah. Well, if that's the case, when I first joined this class, I was coming out of a Reformed theological background.
Yep.
And one of the things that I had a disagreement with, but yet nonetheless stuck with me, and I really appreciated, was the long-out discussion. It's not that long when you boil it down, but what is choice? Your whole argument about what is choice, and name me point out to me the instance in your life where you did not have a choice and you had to pick the evil. I'd say choose evil, but you can't choose evil without a choice. But this whole argument against total depravity.
Yep.
And how
be careful, because Al is readying the flint and tinder as we speak. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
Yes.
And I realize that a lot of people, myself included, come from a Reformed theological background. So we just assume that total depravity. To me, I can only say personally, I was very inspired by the takeaway from that argument, which was you always have the choice, and you can choose to be the hero. That I actually like so much. So I appreciated that I actually made a post-it note, choose to be the hero, and I stuck it on my monitor. And it stayed there for like a year and a half until it kind of fell off. But coming from this background of you don't have a choice, and then simply pointing out, it's like, well, logically speaking, you do have a choice, and God wants you to choose the right one, and you have the capacity to. It's a difficult choice.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that I have, yes, okay, we'll do. It was important in my life too, because I realized that if you don't think that you can do it, or in my case, if you're willing to give yourself the excuse, I went to the excuse far more frequently than I should have, rather than turning around and being like, well, can you do this? Well, yeah, but okay,
well,
then do
it. The motivational, the self-motivational stuff, and this is grounded in truth, but I think that's, one of the things that is so compelling about Jordan Peterson and why he attracts such a large audience on YouTube is that he has messages of that caliber, where it's like, hey, clean up your room.
Right.
It's a very simple thing, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's something you can do, and it's something that actually is effective.
Yeah, and like all things, if you start to do it, I'm a guy that would love to just step in and do all things at one swath, but almost nothing in life works that way. You have to do the fundamentals and learn them and then put it all together. And we just don't have the patience for that, me especially. But when I end up being forced to or forcing myself to your point, it works. I don't know why I keep ignoring that very, very obvious, very consistent truth. But okay,
How do
noted.
you deal with that with respect to the right side of your video? And
To the-
essentially, that you're dealing with cognitive dissonance, number 6. And how do you deal with that? On the right side of your videos, you've got math and engineering.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with choice when you're talking
About these things
a
over here?
language of math, engineering, philosophy?
Aha. Look at him trying to get me going off on a tangent for the next 4 classes.
I mean,
At the end of
that wasn't my intent.
well, it certainly was going to be the effect, but I'll interrupt it and not do that. But I will answer your question briefly, relatively briefly. All of these things. So right now, physics, engineering is based sometimes in physics. Physics is right now stacked fairly heavily on math. Math is at base is Zermelo Fraenkel's set theory and maybe some other ideas out there, but ultimately in some form or other believes itself to be, or at least it purports to follow laws of logic. So that if you say what's the foundational knowledge type that undergirds all of this stuff, it's logic. And then, of course, that turns out to be the same thing on the theological side. And so if you're going to turn around and say, and the arguments that I have made in here against total depravity are not just scriptural arguments, because you'll notice that both sides, reform and a counter-reform, a reform and non-reform, Catholic and Protestant, Orthodox and Catholic, all of them use the exact same scripture set to justify their positions. So rather than say, we're going to just argue it from scripture, I'll put my scripture on the table, you'll put your scripture on the table, and we'll compare them either by weight or by interpretation. When you do that, the people still disagree and tend to hold to their own side. But if you turn around and say, well, the logic you're using to lay this out is self-contradictory or undermines your own point, you'll usually end up in a brief foray in which they'll say, yes, but man's logic is imperfect, God's knowledge is perfect, so you can't trust man's logic. And then you turn around and say, okay, but you just made a syllogism to make an argument for you have to listen to God's logic. So you just logically establish that point. So which one is it? If you can't do that, is there another way for you to establish that point? And they'll eventually realize, no, we're all thinking logically, in which case, okay, if we're thinking logically, let's assume for a second that thinking logically is what we mean by thinking like God thinks. So we want to think like God thinks. How does God think? If we figure it out that it's logically, then we want to think the way God thinks, let's think logically. And that just means, and this is the basis of all of this, you may not be able, I think I've drawn this before, but here's a circle of all the truth that's out there. Proving something is true is very, very hard, but proving something is false is a lot easier. And so if you can show that it has a contradiction in it, you haven't shown that something else is true unless there's only one other option. But you can show that that particular thing is false. And I don't think we've done enough work here in basically showing, hey, here's how much we can prove is false, which means this is the rest of the search area for truth. But it's surprising how much of what we believe is found in this. No, I hold a self-contradictory viewpoint. Like it happens all the time, but you can throw those out and then people can start looking for the truth again, which is, I think, what we need to do in this and this and this and this.
Yeah, and yet you say half the information that we have about physics is not true.
More than half. More than half, yeah. Yeah, that's right. And it's that's a result of two things. One, failure to look all the way down to this level. And two, like superstring theory, quantum mechanics. The way half of the interpretations of quantum mechanics you could throw out right now if you were a good logician. You don't even have to think about it. You don't have to run experiments on them because it can't possibly be the case that they're true. So don't waste this scientific effort on it. Instead, go try something else. Anyway, okay. Sorry. Yes, ma'am.
I was trying to think of just our approach in solid ground. I don't even know what you just like. Thinking about doing a video on truth and how we tend to start up here, but it's better to start lower.
At some point, I don't know whether it's the first one or the fifth one or the 10th one. Absolutely, that's a great point. What would you title that video? Pyramid of the pyramid of truth. Okay. Yeah, just because it says pyramid and truth, that's going to get a whole different audience set that we get out there.
What is true?
Yes.
What is true? How do I know what is true? Is the question we ask.
Yes.
Are you looking at essential truth?
This was this was when we talk about our structures of knowledge, planting us at it in a way that, like, when he first says it, you're like, okay, that's interesting, maybe. But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, wow, that guy was 100% right about that. That's exactly how we should think about truth. So he says we think of a modern truth like this skyscraper of knowledge that we have, when in reality, our truth is like an empty lot with a couple of bricks piled on top of each other here and there. But that's really what we've got. And you're like, well, that's a very pessimistic assessment. And you go digging through all the things that we believe, and you're like, nope, that's 100% right. They're very disconnected. They're not thoroughly justified from top to bottom. If you go and you dig through even this kind of stuff, it takes 4 steps max to get to a contradiction in these things. Like, it's ridiculous. I had no idea until I started this kind of project to say, okay, well, what are they basing this assumption on? What are they basing that assumption on? You're 4 steps. You're less than Kevin Bacon to a contradiction in all of these things. So, I don't know. Yeah, I'm with you. The Pyramid of Truth. We'll figure it out. That may be the title.
Yeah, that could be.
I had heard an example of that. A fellow who works, I think he was a pastor at Campus Crusade for Christ or something. And he was assigned to a large university, very technical, known for its technical approach to things. And he was talking with students, and they were talking about, Genesis 1, and the classic example is, okay, how do you approach this?
Yeah.
His approach to them was, look at the first sentence. In the beginning, God created. That is the peak.
Yep.
And then you go down a couple of levels, and then they start talking about light and night and days, and they're talking about facts, and they get hung up. Are these things, these facts, true?
Yes.
And he's essentially trying to tell them, anytime you're looking at a story, look at the essential truth and not the facts that are used in the story to support that essential truth.
Yeah.
And if you buy the essential truth, don't get all bogged down. So that's kind of like what she's talking about, like a pyramid. Okay, at the top is this essential truth, and then you have all these facts, which, I've listened to 2 or 3 people talk here in RBC about, well, if you don't believe, God created Earth in 6 days, or created the universe in 6 days, you're not Christian, or you're not blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people just go, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Because they're getting hung up on some of the facts and how they're tied to that essential truth.
Yeah.
And so his approach in dealing with a lot of these students were, let's look at the essential truth in the story, not get so bogged down, are these facts true or not? Which I think that's where most people get really hung up, because they don't understand the literature. And so we're telling them, well, this is a fact. And if you understood the literature, then you could buy it.
Yeah, I think.
And that was his approach to dealing with engineering students, physics majors, math majors, and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to break down to, like, categories of knowledge and what exactly we mean by what. So a fact in the court of law, a fact in an engineering class, and a fact to a philosopher are going to be 3 different things. And so you have to have a common definition in order to avoid confusion. So yeah, I'm with you on that. Yes, sir.
This is not related to that, so we have more to say.
This is solid ground. We're infinite circles of readdress. So
As I thought of another topic, I don't know if it would already fit within one of the 7, but the confines of taking scripture as infallible.
yeah.
Because most of the conversations I ever have with anyone that's atheist or agnostic tends to not be from the intellectual breakdown of having some form of view of something that they just don't understand, but more like they take an attribute of God and say, I don't like that.
Yeah.
And then they remove it. And some of them try to do it in a compromised way where they keep
everything else.
Yep.
But just remove those, and then you run into issues even in the Christian circles, where you have like a Methodist denomination right now complete shambles for that.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. That's a good way. Yeah, Methodist Church is one that was removing the bricks by which they had built their edifice one at a time with no regard to what was a supporting structure and what wasn't. And it comes falling down fairly quickly, doesn't it?
It was dangerous because it started from a viewpoint of an attempted push of like love and care. Like, you know, we're trying to remove this aspect so that we can be inclusive.
Yes.
And it's got worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, and the whole, joking secular statement of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There's the problem, the exception I would make to that is the smart aleck Christian philosopher answer to that is, what do you mean by good intentions? And until someone turns around and says, until somebody realizes the reason God's telling us all these weird things is because he's an engineer. And like one of my favorite semi-spook stories, this is apocryphal, I can't source it for you, was that I think it's come out now that the Hubble Space Telescope, everybody realizes, was based on a spy satellite. But at the time, it wasn't supposed to be well known for some reason. But someone who was basically just like, how do we want to look at stuff out there? What do we need to do? Someone was like, let's just turn one of these things around, sort of. I mean, obviously, these were focused very, very near. That one's supposed to be focused super far, especially deep field. So the optics have got to change. But the mechanics to the satellite were similar. So supposedly, this is the story I get told is, NASA's trying to deal with this problem. They get Hubble launched, and they can't get the solar panels, I think was the reference, to fold out properly. Like they start to and then they stop in some position. And they can get them to come back, but they can't get them to extend past that one. And finally someone says, hang on a second. They go and they make a phone call, and two guys show up the next day, and they're like, run this code. And people are like, who are you? And they're like, it's not important, run this code. And they're like, we're not going to put some random code and upload it to the Hubble Space Telescope. They're like, you can do it or not. Is it working? Give it a shot. And so they do, and all of a sudden, thing folds out, and they're like, okay, thanks, bye. And they leave. And those are supposedly some NRO guys that, we ran into this problem 15 years ago when we were first flying this thing that you think is so cutting edge. And so that there's always, sometimes you can show up and drop 2 lines of code like you're in the movie on somebody, and it just straightens everything out. And I think that there's, not every problem can be solved that way, but it's super satisfying when you can, and it helps people believe that you have thought through it shows a hidden expertise, I guess, is the moral to the story. And one of the things that I would love for people globally to realize is that there sits in the philosophical community a hidden expertise in Christian philosophy, where Christian philosophers have actually done far, far better intellectual work than anybody else out there. And people need to start trusting Christian philosophers again. And looking into how Christianity itself lends itself to good philosophical inquiry. But it was a long tirade.
Can we record? We'll pass 2 minutes on that and just stick it on YouTube.
Yeah, that would be a sketchy one indeed, wouldn't it? Nothing on that.
The section in Craig's textbook, Philosophical Foundation for Christian Worldview, that I refer back to the most is when he contrasts skepticism and particularism about theories of knowledge, first what knowledge is, and then it's with clearly the idea of properly basic belief that the skeptic response to it could be wrong isn't sufficient to overturn. They have to actually show that, present an argument of why it is wrong.
Yeah.
And people get hung up on that the most.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how to do this in a video. I don't know how to do this in a video, but my guess would be it's more along the lines of the Veritasium guy and his video that I think we talked about, and I think you're the guy that found it. The whole, if you show somebody a video that is like, this is the right way to think of something, and you show them the video and then you ask them questions about it, they tend not to learn. But if you start the video with, here's a common perception of how this works, and it's wrong, and here's why. And then here's another perception of how it works, and it's wrong, and here's why. And you show them the wrong ways, and then you show them the right way, that people's learning went up by something nuts, like 60% or something. And so I imagine that the right way to do that concept is, hey, here are 3 different ways of conceiving of it, and here's why they don't work. Here's a 4th way that does work, unless you think differently.
Yeah, that'd be good. It include like methodology approach, which is like, well, what method do you use to like know that that's true? But you're not going to regress because then you need a method for that method.
Right.
You need a method for that.
Which is probably why planning ends up with properly basic beliefs, which is he says, you got to start somewhere, so start with this. And I think if you read, I think planning would probably object to this, but I'll say it anyway. Properly basic beliefs is just another way of starting with more axioms than you do in I think, therefore I am. And the reason is, if you're justified in thinking that you're there in the first place, that is to say you doubt, then why are you not justified in also thinking that the external world is real? And I know that there are a couple steps in between there, but most people don't. Maybe planning looked at that and said, nobody gets caught up in those, right? They always lead to what's going to end up being properly basic beliefs in the long run. Yes, Michael.
On that note, here another video that I think would be interesting would be a while ago we did kind of a skeptical start to God. You just start with like, well, I doubt that I exist. And
Yes.
you look at why do I exist, and then you start looking at the phrase "I exist" and the logical conclusions that come out of that. I think that maybe you could make a video talking about, getting to God through just the statement, I doubt.
All right, I like that one. In fact, I love that one. It's not number 8.
Yeah.
It's 1 prime. Okay. What else? Other ideas? One more on that.
Yeah, most of the people in this room have come up with an idea for a video. I was thinking if hypothetically, not saying we should do this, but if hypothetically everyone in the room were to do just a first draft idea for a video, we'd have a lot of good ideas.
Yeah, so if it's not, I have not.
And everybody has a different.
I haven't asked for that, but I'll say this, man. If you're at all interested in doing that, open invite, please do it. I didn't want to say something like, I didn't want to ask anybody to do it. But if you're volunteering for it, I'll all day long. Fire it in any format you want and send it, email, text, provide it, carve it into cuneiform, whatever you want.
This is more Adam's, what you said, the young Earth and old Earth, and then I think we touched on it like 6 days or 7 days of creation versus more the little sense or the I don't know the other sense. Yeah, so
yeah.
That's what I know. Adam touched on that before. He said that for a few years ago. But yeah.
So I'll you guys are gonna. I don't know if you're gonna believe me with this when I say this. This is a very interesting topic, a fascinating topic, in fact, and a very important topic. And the reason that I rarely address it are at least these 3 things. One of them is, in my belief system, what I understand about our current scientific inquiry, our current state of technology, I genuinely don't. I think that if this is as much information as you would want, here's all the information about, all the truth about how old the universe is, how old the Earth is, how things came to be, etc. And that, we think that we have this much of it, that's how much, we understand about it. And I actually think that the actual facts that we have about this is this sliver that's this wide, maybe. So the problem is, I think that we know 1% of the data. And that the other 99%, to make a guess in this case based on 1%, you're just probably going to be lucky to get it right. Now, maybe it's a 50-50 proposition if you draw the line somewhere out there and you're like, everything on this side's young, everything on that side's old, 50-50 whether you get it right or not. But if there really is this much ignorance out there, this is why I'm not nuts about coming down on a particular position. I think there are really, really good arguments for an old universe. I think there are really, really good arguments for a young universe. I think there are fatal flaws to each person's side of the argument. And so I actually don't hold a rigorous belief on which of these is true. And so whenever people ask what I think, instead of saying that, I tend to give them Gerald Schroeder's question of like, according to whose clock? And then throw relativity in there and basically be like, it is both 6 days and it's, 14 billion years. It just depends on which clock in the universe you're talking about. So which one are you talking about? I usually use that as a conversation stopper rather than a starter. But the other reason that I'm not nuts about putting this one out there first is the second you make an Young and Earth Old Creation video and you come down on a particular side, you have eliminated a whole bunch of your audience because they're already like, rah, this is what we believe about this. So I am very interested in this topic, but I also almost don't want to do a video on it just because I feel like we'd be carving audience out and throwing it away. But maybe that's a terrible idea.
Well, it might be good to do a video basically saying, because a lot of people think that, I guess they take creation as like one of the most important points, like, basically like it's like you on salvation. Yeah. But I don't think it's as important as a lot of people think.
Well, I'm just like, ultimately, if you want to meet Jesus, does it matter whether he took X amount of time or Y amount of time to create stuff? No, the bottom line is Jesus. And at the end of the day, you can ask him, by the way, which one's right? This one's right. Oh, okay, well, that was easy.
Well, those debates aren't really about age, because other people just say apparent age.
Yeah.
It's if animal death existed before Adam sinned.
Yeah.
That's the main
without being disrespectful to people asking questions, who cares?
Well, they're like, well, did death enter the world with Adam or not?
Well, death to humans did, at a minimum. And I love me some lizards and rabbits and dogs and whatnot, but they're second tier to me in terms of like who I care about, how whether they die or not. So I know PETA would take a significant exception to that, but I'm going to be selfish about it and say, yeah. So you're right. But at the end of the day, I almost want us to only focus on, and I don't know that this is justified. I mean, at some point you may counter this with saying, I almost want us to focus on these really, really core foundational things because there are already a lot of people that do this kind of thing out there. And unless we have something new that's like, you wanted to settle the debate, here's how you settle the debate. I almost want to avoid it because we know. Whereas that the data can be interpreted two ways. Whereas I do think that in some of these videos, we have something that should be you want to settle the debate, here's a settlement of the debate kind of thing. That's at least what I'm hoping to be the case.
I think that's a very good position to hold on that, and especially if you describe it in just that way. And I think that's a good, don't put that one out there immediately, but if this actually goes anywhere, X years from now, if it ever does, who knows?
Then maybe it becomes a topic of
discussion.
discussion.
Maybe you need to pull it out of your back pocket.
Yeah, right.
I think that what you just said is a good response to that. And that, like, look, how much does it matter? How much do we actually know?
Yeah, roger that. Yeah, I'm at least predisposed to think that. Yes, sir, and then yes, ma'am.
And the idea of going to like more of the core aspect of it, have you already done a topic of why more God?
Have we done a topic in solid ground on it? Yes. Have we got it listed on this list yet? No. So why the Christian God versus, because to your point, almost everything that we talk about in here points to a broad theism, monotheism really, versus saying here are all the candidates for it. Now to your point, I guess we did that on a couple of occasions in a shorter format, but it is in the stack in the inverted pyramid of knowledge. It's so many steps up, and I guess here I'll say this a little more overtly. I started to say it earlier, and I stopped. My belief is in the inverted pyramid of knowledge that we spend almost all of our time talking about these higher levels that have all these dependencies, and nobody thinks down here at the base. And because this is so intellectually neglected, I felt I choose to focus on this as much as I can. That argument is a couple levels up from this one, but to your point, when we've done an adequate job of this, that's where you immediately start reaching out and touching these. So maybe that would be one of the first ones that we reached out and touched. Madam, I think was next.
I was going to say, there's one here. I'm going to still try to get him to come back, but there's some fellow that I play games with. He's a Christian, but telling him about solid ground. He's like, oh, wait, are we going to talk about like creationism? So he's on the older side.
Yeah.
I think, and also I've heard that from other, like it often seems to stop people from coming. And I used to be hardcore like creationist until I like started looking at the other sides and like they were
Some intellectual material on both sides.
I still believe in creationist, obviously we all believe in creation, but theistic.
Evolution versus, yeah.
Anyway, point being, I think it might be worth having a middle ground video to just remind people like we know this much.
Yeah, and you don't have to, like, you'll remember we had a gentleman that would come here occasionally that was a legitimate flat earther, like 100% believes there's a flat earth, militantly so. And when I finally got to why do you think this? Because by that time I've provided enough evidence that if he was even close to open-minded, he would have said, maybe I need to question this. In his mind, he had read the Bible as very clearly describing the earth as flat. And because he was so certain that God existed and that the Bible was true, that he psychologically was absolutely unwilling to even consider the fact that might not be the case. Because he didn't believe that was open to interpretation. He's like, no, the Bible's very clear the earth is flat. No. I was like, I don't know that I agree with you about that. But I don't know. Yeah, right. Michael, and then so. And then, thank you.
I don't know if you'd want to make a video on this or not, but your response to abortion.
Yeah.
Taking apart the moral argument, that's going to lose. I don't know. That's a thorny topic. But. Yeah,
I do. There are some days where I think that in 100 years we're going to look back on what we've done with abortion, and look back on ourselves like we look back on the Nazis. Mm-hmm. And there are other days where I'm like, no, we've been killing babies. If you read Hippocrates, he's got something in there about abortifacients and how he objects and you shouldn't do it kind of thing. But we've literally been aborting babies for thousands of years. And so I don't know what the long-term thing is here. I think it's as horrific as genocide. But so I'm willing to take a stand on that one above and beyond what I normally would, even if it's slightly divisive, because the fact that we're killing babies by the millions is nuts. Absolutely nuts.
And there's a principle.
I think I guess an earlier one might be good because you're talking about your friend who's a flat earther because he's taking his interpretation of the Bible. I guess addressing, because people often use it as, an excuse not to think the sovereignty of the Bible.
Yes.
So I think that's something good to address because I've recently watched Jubilee have a video on Christians versus former Christians, and the one pastor they had there, all his things were well, this is what Jesus says, this is what the Bible says, and it's well, that's not going to convince Christians of anything.
Yeah, and I think back to the project of atomic language and whether that's an achievable project or how we even go about doing it. I think 90% of this one lies in the definition. People recognize is that just because a sovereign is sovereign doesn't mean that everybody in the kingdom does what the sovereign wants. It just means that the sovereign has the ability to punish them within his rights if he so chooses. Not just punish them, do whatever he wants. Yes?
Well, I guess I've come down to a 3-step thing to get to reasonable that God exists.
Yep.
And the first one's easiest is reasonable to think causality, cause and effect. Second one's it's reasonable to think actual infinites don't exist.
Yeah, so this is what
for that one I have harder time.
Barring William be here next time, I'll start on the other two and we'll talk. So I'll show you the chain that I'm working through right now, and I would love to get you guys' opinion on where it ought to be broken down and how in terms of video format. So if you're good with it, we'll start with that next time.
And that's the first roadblock that people push back. It's oh. And then the third one is it's reasonable to think that consciousness, immaterial consciousness can exist.
Right.
And people push back.
Yeah. Do we the last question because we're out of time, do we in here the wizard approach to pointing out that you remember me saying this one of imagine you've got X trillion people on Earth, get them all in wizard robes with the hats and the moons and stars, have them all chant 1 and 0, set them up in logic gates or whatever else. If you believe that you can chant a mind into existence, then like that's what you believe. That's what you have to believe that you can get consciousness out of AI. But yeah, my question was, will people be like, well, yeah, I guess you can chant a brain into existence? And you're like, no, I feel like Schrodinger, who's like, see how ridiculous this is? And people are like, I guess the cat's both alive and dead. He's like, no, that's not what I was saying.
That Michael guy on YouTube did like an entire 20-minute video on the Stanley brain experiment where they recreated it. And like they got an entire town together and had flags waving up and down. And they read they read a word and it got interpreted by the back end like, oh, behold, we created a brain.
Send me that video because I would love to see that. That's nuts.